Everyone thinks they already know what happened in Eden. It's one of those stories told so many times that people stop checking the details. Like a meme repeated until the original context disappears. And right at the center of this oversimplified version sits Eve, who usually gets blamed before the story even begins. But the real story? It's a lot less storybook painting and a lot more real choices, real consequences, and two humans figuring out freedom for the first time. Picture Eden not as a cozy watercolor garden, but more like a massive open-world map. Beautiful, yes, but also full of things to manage, boundaries to remember, and a very real sense of, please don't touch that one tree. The setting was peaceful, but not passive. Nothing in the garden ran on autopilot. Now the classic version most people hear goes something like Eve alone, tree, serpent, bite, boom, downfall achieved. Very clean, very convenient, very wrong. Because she wasn't actually alone. That's the part everyone skips, like ignoring half a text thread and then confidently explaining the whole drama. It's the biblical equivalent of seeing one line from a group chat and assuming you've pieced together the entire story. Spoiler, you haven't. The narrator pauses here because this is where the story cracks open. There was a conversation happening. The serpent spoke. Eve responded. And during this whole moment, someone else was right there. Not miles away. Not off watering plants, not lost in some philosophical daydream. Adam was literally beside her, but the simplified retelling usually erases him faster than a teacher erases a whiteboard. It makes it look as if Eve took a solo field trip to the bad decision aisle while Adam was home working on his hobbies. That version? Too simple. The garden didn't operate on solo scenes. It wasn't a movie where characters wander around separated unless the plot requires it. This was early humanity. Everything was shared, the space, the responsibility, the curiosity, even the confusion. And here's the modern observation nobody likes to admit. Blaming only Eve is basically the ancient version of pointing at the person closest to the camera and saying, yep, definitely their fault. It's lazy, it's incomplete, and it skips the actual tension of the story. Because something bigger is happening here. A choice is forming, silently, between two people. One speaks. One stays quiet, but both are present. It's not a solo moment. It's a shared one disguised as an individual mistake. And that's exactly where the story truly begins. The moment most people imagine in Eden usually looks like this. Eve alone, wandering the garden, casually bumping into a talking serpent like someone who accidentally joins the wrong Zoom call. But that scene, it doesn't exist. It was never written that way. There is no secret solo moment, no dramatic spotlight, no caught off guard by temptation setup. What the text actually shows is much more awkward and much more human. The serpent speaks, Eve responds, and the entire time, someone else is standing right there. That someone is Adam, not far away, not on the other side of the garden, not doing push-ups behind a tree, right there. It's the kind of detail everyone skips because it ruins the neat, tidy version of the story. The version where Eve carries 100% of the blame, while Adam quietly disappears from the frame like an actor who forgot his line. A modern analogy makes this painfully clear. It's like blaming just one person for a project disaster, even though the entire team was in the room, watching it happen. Nobody likes that scenario. It feels unfair. It feels incomplete. And yet somehow that became the official retelling of the Eden moment. Now here comes the dry punchline of the entire situation. Spoiler, silence is not innocence. Adam wasn't giving a TED talk on responsibility. He wasn't debating the serpent. He wasn't saying, hey, maybe let's think this through. He just stood there, a witness with nothing to say. And this silence matters, because the real tension of the scene isn't about who touched the fruit first. It's about who watched everything unfold without lifting a finger. It's the oldest recorded case of, I saw it happening and said nothing, and humanity has been replaying that dynamic ever since. The narrator pauses again, letting the awkwardness settle. This wasn't a moment of individual failure. This was a duo making a joint decision, one speaking, one staying quiet, both participating in the same unfolding choice. The garden wasn't running on isolated storylines. These were the only two humans on the planet. Shared space, shared responsibility, shared consequences. Pretending that one was alone rewrites the scene in a way the original narrative never did. And this leads to the real twist. This story stops being about a single person the second you notice who else was there. Because the problem wasn't solitude, the problem was partnership without communication. Not disobedience in isolation, but disconnection happening in real time. And this is where the story stops being individual and becomes shared. Up to this point, most retellings still try to keep the moment tidy, the kind of tidy where one person did the thing and the other magically fades into the background like an extra in a medieval documentary. But this next part ruins every oversimplified version of the story because the action is not unilateral. It's collective. Both eat, both choose, both cross the line. There is no dramatic pause between decisions, no long delay, no slow-motion hesitation where one acts and the other gasps in shock. The scene moves fast because it's something happening between two people who make the same choice in the same moment. But modern summaries simplify this so aggressively, it might as well be a meme. You know the type. Bold text on a bright background saying, "Eve messed up." Clean, easy, and completely inaccurate. A more honest comparison would be this. Imagine watching a traffic accident from a terrible angle, the kind where only one person is visible, and then confidently declaring that the entire thing was their fault simply because the camera happened to be pointed at them. That's basically how the Eden story gets retold. The real narrative is far messier and much more human. And here's where the psychology kicks in. Shame doesn't appear as an isolated reaction. It arrives like a shared realization. They both notice something shift inside themselves, something that wasn't there a minute earlier. It's not individual guilt, it's joint awareness. And the proof is in what they do next. They hide together, not separately. Not each one went to deal with their emotions privately. They vanish into the trees side by side, two people suddenly confused by a world that felt completely normal the day before. Then comes the justification phase, which again is a team activity. They both try to explain themselves. They both scramble for excuses. They both point to something outside of themselves as if passing the blame around will magically cancel the whole situation. And then the accusations start. Not from one toward the other, but from each toward anything that seems easier to blame than their own choices. It's humanity's first recorded argument, and it starts exactly the way most arguments still start today, with two people trying very hard not to admit what they both did. There's no villain versus victim dynamic here, no solo protagonist who made a catastrophic decision while the other watched from the sidelines. This is a shared moment, a shared action, and now a shared fallout. And this is where the narrative finally stops being comfortable, because the spotlight doesn't land on one person, it lands on both. And this is where the narrative gets uncomfortable for everyone. Once the hiding fails, and it does, the story shifts. Not toward a courtroom drama, not toward a who did it first interrogation. The response that follows isn't focused on sequencing, it's focused on impact. Because the question isn't who bit first, the question is what just broke. The conversation that unfolds doesn't center on timing, it centers on fracture, relationship fractures, trust fractures, responsibility fractures, the easy harmony of the garden fractures, and suddenly the atmosphere changes. The ground that once felt effortless now feels heavy. Work becomes harder, connection becomes complicated. The world isn't erased, it's altered, subtly but permanently. This is where the entire blame game narrative starts to feel small compared to what's actually happening. The consequences aren't delivered like a scoreboard keeping track of who messed up first. They unfold like ripple effects, spreading outward from a shared decision. That's the uncomfortable part, because it means the story isn't about assigning guilt to one person. It's about watching a partnership experience the fallout of something they both stepped into. And here's the irony nobody talks about. The story that turned into her fault is in many ways also a story about his silence. It's not dramatic, it's not flashy, it doesn't even involve a new action. But silence, in that moment, carried weight, and weight eventually turns into consequence. A modern parallel makes this clearer. Imagine watching a problem grow inside a company, a family, or even a group of friends. Everyone sees the tension building. Everyone senses something is off. But nobody wants to be the one to say this isn't right. So the silence stretches, and eventually the whole thing cracks. Not because one person moved first, but because no one stepped up. That's the real shift in Eden. It's not about who grabbed the fruit fastest. It's about how quickly shared responsibility turned into shared fallout. There's no isolated defeat here, no single loser in the story. What happens next affects both. The struggle becomes mutual. The distance becomes mutual. The weight becomes mutual. It's not a solo collapse, it's a shared loss. And that changes everything about how the story should be read. Because once you remove the simplified blame narrative, you're left with something far more complex and far more relevant. Two people, one decision, a ripple that touches everything. And the biggest twist of all, this isn't even the most surprising part of the chapter, and the biggest plot twist hasn't even been mentioned yet. The final reveal isn't complicated. It's actually the simplest line in the entire Eden narrative, the line everyone skips because it ruins centuries of easy storytelling. Eve didn't sin first, and she didn't sin alone. That's the point. The real story isn't built on a sequence of who reached for what first. It's built on two people making the same decision in the same moment. One speaking, one silent, both fully present. A shared choice disguised for generations as a solo mistake. And once you see that, the whole narrative shifts. A quick modern recap makes it even clearer. Decisions were simultaneous, not a relay race. Responsibility was mutual, not one-sided. The silence mattered, because silence always does. The choice reshaped everything, not because of order, but because of unity. The retelling got oversimplified for centuries, because easy stories spread faster than accurate ones. Look at the pattern. When people retell the scene, they shrink it down to a one-person disaster. But the actual story refuses to work that way. Every part of it is shared. The moment, the action, the fallout, the hiding, the justification, the blame, the consequences. This isn't a case study in isolated wrongdoing. It's an early example of what happens when two free humans stop communicating at exactly the wrong time. And that leads to the quiet reflection beneath the whole narrative. The story was never about who started it. Asking that question misses the entire emotional architecture of the moment. What really matters is what happens when dialogue collapses, when partnership turns into parallel silence, when two people choose to move without checking on what the other is thinking. The fall doesn't come from one act, it comes from disconnection. Think of it this way. Blaming just one of them is like watching a building collapse and insisting only one wall was responsible. That's not how structures work. And Eden was a structure, relational, emotional, interconnected, which brings everything to the final comparison. It wasn't a solo fall, it was a shared collapse. And that one sentence reframes the entire story, not as a single failure, but as a moment where two people walked into the same choice with the same freedom and the same lack of caution. That's why the ending lands the way it does. Not as a punishment report or a ranking of who messed up more, but as a shift in the world created by a joint decision. And that's why the final line of the episode settles exactly here. The story was never about Eve alone. It was about two people, and a choice neither made carefully. Which misunderstood biblical moment should I simplify next? Cain, Noah, Abraham,